So after watching Dune Part 2, I got curious and decided to watch David Lynch's Dune from 1984. Now going into this movie and being aware of its reputation, I was at least hoping for a kind of so bad that it's good type movie. I definitely expected it to have its issues, and I was really just wanting to see some interesting practical effects from the time. And after finishing the movie, I'm disappointed to say I didn't really get out of it what I wanted. Now don't get me wrong, there certainly were a lot of very unintentionally funny moments here and there, and I'll say there is really one interesting creature effect in this movie that I'll say I found memorable. My experience watching this movie wasn't really all that fun, and this movie does have its fair share of issues to go along with it. Now the biggest problem that this movie has is that it just tries to cram way too much material into such a short amount of time. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that just seem completely devoted to exposition and absolutely nothing else, and it made it really difficult to get invested into the world and characters when it just seemed like it was interested in getting to the next scene each time. Now throughout this movie it really felt like they were cramming in a lot and really affected it negatively. But at the hour-and-a-half mark, it just genuinely got insane. It honestly felt like they were running out of time, just felt like they needed to get through this as quickly as humanly possible. Now, the first scene of this movie is a character explaining exposition to us while looking into the camera. She continues to fade in and out as she's explaining this information to us, and when it seems like she's finally done talking, she fades back in and says, "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you." It was pretty unintentionally funny, and this whole scene just feels like a genuine parody of itself. And despite the literally opening scene of this movie just being devoted to pure exposition, the next two scenes just seem to be completely devoted to exposition as well. There are characters who are just explaining their plans and what's going to happen later on in this movie. And another huge issue with this movie is that it just has way too much voiceover narration.
A hunter seeker. Can't get me if I don't move. What's wrong with Gurney? He's not making this.
One small point.
Here it comes.
It happens almost every single scene, and it's just very distracting overall. Now another funny yet very distracting part of this movie would be the shield fight scene. It's an incredibly dated effect, and it's very difficult to understand what's even going on during this scene. Another aspect of note about this movie, since they try to get through so much material in such a short amount of time, there are characters who are introduced that are almost immediately killed off. There are concepts and ideas that are presented that are never brought up again. There is a lot of very weird things in this movie that are just never explained. It's a very interesting experience to say the least. Now to give a couple of examples of the weird aspects about this movie. Now near the end of the movie, the Harkonnens introduce this idea to one of their captive prisoners that in order for him to obtain the antidote to the poison they gave him, he has to milk this cat. Now not only is this concept completely thrown away and never brought up again during this movie, but the character that they're keeping captive barely even has a role in the story aside from near the beginning of the film. I think he's there in the ending scene of the film, but I don't think his story has any sort of conclusion to it. It just felt very weird that they would introduce this incredibly bizarre idea and not even have anything to do with anything else in this movie. Another also very weird moment is when one of the Harkonnens pulls out the tongue of a cow and just starts eating it, but I will say that is one of the more unintentionally funny parts of this film. Now originally David Lynch planned this movie to be much longer, but the studio made him trim it down to 2 hours, and it definitely feels like a movie that was forced to be trimmed down. And I have to mention, watching this movie after watching Dune Part 2, it just makes it all the much worse. It's a real night and day comparison, especially near the ending of the film. The final sequence in Dune Part 2 is just genuinely epic and exciting, but with the ending to this film, it's just genuinely so lame and rushed and uninspired. Another aspect that I found of note is the character of Mapes and just how quickly she's introduced and how quickly she's killed off. Now I haven't read the whole book yet. Now to my understanding, she did play a more active role in the story. I could be mistaken about that, but the way it was presented in this film, she felt like she was going to be more of an important character, but then she's almost just immediately killed off, like right in the next scene. The costume design and overall look of this world can sometimes be very funny, especially with characters who have very large eyebrows. Now, what I will compliment about this movie is you can definitely tell that David Lynch and the crew tried against all odds. But with a movie that's forced to be shortened, this is really the best you can expect. In terms of all performances, they're either really underwhelming or just flat out bad. The main character who played Paul was just genuinely very bad throughout. Sting is in this movie and he certainly wasn't great. The character of the Baron was just mostly funny rather than intimidating or threatening. Now there is actually one aspect to this film that I actually enjoyed quite a lot, and that would be the music by Toto. It's a very interesting composition of rock, and it genuinely feels very epic. Now overall, I'm very glad that I watched this film to check it off my list, but I would not recommend it to people as it's so bad that it's good type movie. Now, if you're interested in watching this movie, then by all means go for it, but just be aware that there are only a few funny moments here and there. And now I think this one deserves a 3 out of 10.